So now we're going to differentiate between scientism and science. After reading that little history and kind of going through what scientism is like, here's what science is. As opposed to realism, science is actually anti-realism. And what is that? Scientific theories are models which represent the data in the most coherent way possible, but are not considered true in the absolute sense and are subject to human biases. In many ways, a theory is the same as a tafsir. Okay, it's a commentary of the world. It's a commentary of what we see. I perceive something, but just because I perceive it does not necessitate that I have the appropriate interpretation. For example, a mirage. If I don't know what a mirage is, and I come upon a mirage in the desert, I'm going to assume that it's probably water, right? Until, of course, I approach it and then I realize that's not the case and it's just an illusion. And then I realize how a mirage works, and in the future, I can ascertain that this is not really water. Okay. Whereas a realist would say whatever they see is exactly the case until they, whatever they're perceiving, that interpretation is actually as it is. And one of the reasons that anti-realism is more popular within the philosophical community is because, as we know from history, not just from the explanation by Thomas Kuhn and others, but we know that this can't be true because theories are changing all the time. Okay, so a few questions here. Anonymous attendee: if science is just a framework for understanding the world, why cannot flat earthers observe the data and propose a flat earth as a theory? That's a good question. And the reason they can, but it has to be more coherent than the other theory. You see what I'm saying? That's how you judge them. Okay. So for instance, if one theory has a better way of explaining all the data versus another theory, then we reject the other theory because the other theory is useless. It doesn't help us in any way. Oh, speaking of which, I forgot to mention that Kuhn and Karl Popper had a debate and Kuhn won. And Karl Popper eventually had to admit that he was wrong. So yeah, I wanted to go into that whole drama. It was very interesting. You can read up on it yourself. But it was really a cool debate. Clarification by anti-realist. Do you mean in an epistemic sense rather than ontological sense? Another question. I meant in an epistemic sense. I'm sorry. Yes, this is all epistemology. We're not talking about ontology here. Now, when you say somebody is a realist, they believe that what they're seeing is actually the case. Okay, but the anti-realist will say, no, what I perceive is not actually the case. It's just a construct. There is actually a reality behind that construct, but what I'm perceiving as is not exactly that. Okay, because human beings cannot step outside of my, this is a problem with realism as well, is that it considers to be objective, right? And what does objective mean? Well, there are two meanings. One is that factual, and the other is so that's what we use in the colloquial sense. The other one is perception outside of the subjective sense. So people have this weird idea nowadays that they can jump outside of their brain and kind of like see everything as it is, but that's not how it works. Everything that we perceive is from the subjective lens. Okay, there is nothing that humans perceive and their biases don't touch. Do you understand? Like, I cannot interpret the world outside of my own perspective. It's not possible. Which is another reason that realism is stupid. Okay, so anti-realism. Next, what else is science and reality? Pragmatism. People consider this a dirty word. It's not in the scientific community, or at least among scientific philosophers. So what is pragmatism? And this is probably the most popular version of science today within the philosophical community. And this is the one that Thomas Kuhn and Willard Quine and others had followed. And this is the reason that that logical positivism and scientism were defeated. It was by these philosophers. Okay, the pragmatist movement. I don't know if you're aware of an individual by the name of Jordan Peterson, Professor Jordan Peterson. Whether you agree with him or not, he has a lot of interesting ideas in terms of psychology, and he's a pragmatist. Okay, pragmatist philosopher. Okay, so pragmatism. Science is a tool, and theories are validated based on their usefulness and coherence. So whatever theory makes the most predictions and whatever theory most coherently takes the data and makes a good explanation out of it is the best theory. That's it. It's not because it's true. It doesn't make it true. It just makes it the best theory. That's it. So there's your answer to your flat Earth versus round Earth. Flat Earthers are ridiculous because their theory doesn't answer really any of the problems. It doesn't actually explain anything. They try. They just deny what the round Earthers are saying. That's all they really do. It's just like atheists deny what theists are doing. Atheists never really propound their own theories. They just say, hey, that's wrong because there's no evidence. I'm smart. And that's it. That's really all they do. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Ahmed Faraj. What about God of the gaps? If it's the only explanation that we have, I don't really understand your question. Could you make it more, clarify that, please? And I'll continue and come back to you. Oh, Abu Faris. This sounds very Kantian. Oh, yes. Is the Islamic perspective about realism closer to Kantian, Humean, or Cartesian, or something more nuanced? Oh, no. First off, it is more nuanced. It is not Kantian, it's not Humean, it's not Cartesian, it's more of a Heideggerian and Kuhnian understanding. The demarcation between the reality and the subjective is really superficial. I'm sorry for all of you out there, I'm just answering this question, but for you, if you don't understand, I apologize, I'll try to explain it. The distinction between what is outside, what is externally real, and what is within our subjective perspective is a superficial distinction, because we can't understand anything other than what we subjectively perceive. So we can only assume that there's a difference. You see what I'm saying? Whereas Cartesians, Humeans, and Kantians would say, well, there's this like whole other world out there, you know, that we're just not perceiving. That is behind the veil, you know what I mean? And that's more like a very Sufi understanding of things. I'm not going to go into Sufi metaphysics. I'm not Sufi, but I'm just telling you. Something like a Mullah Sadra thing going on. So yeah, I hope that answered it to some extent. Okay, going on. I apologize, I'm a little parched right now. So instead of being progressive, it's paradigmatic. Okay, what does that mean? So instead of being gradual, science is not progressive, but adaptive. As humans obtain more data about the natural world, theories are updated and tweaked until they can no longer account for said data, and then they are replaced by a new and dissimilar system with its own rules and languages. So basically, like you have a program, right? And you keep updating it when it has like viruses or it has like problems, and you keep updating, or you update a new version, 2.0, 2.3, 2.5, you know, and then eventually you just get rid of the whole thing because this is a bad program. You can replace it completely. That's basically in a similar way how science works. You have one theory that works for a certain time. It explains what it needs to explain, and then as you collect more data, the theory is not quite accurate. And then you change the theory to accommodate the information. So it's not like the information is like coming into your head and then your theory just forms randomly in your mind. What we do as humans is that we observe the world. And then outside of that, we come up with a construct ourselves, a commentary from our own minds that makes that coherent. So something else atheists don't understand, a lot of them don't, is that they think that the information just sort of like slams into their brain and all of a sudden they're like, oh, I understand the world. Like, no, that's not how it works. In fact, we come up with a theory sometimes before we even make the observations. For example, black holes. How do we come up with the idea of black holes? Did somebody see a black hole? No. Somebody saw some anomalies, some differences, some strange behaviors in the universe, and then they decided to come up with a theory for it to explain what it was, and then they saw more observations which confirmed that theory, and then we come up with this concept. We still don't even understand what black holes are exactly anyway, but the whole concept behind black holes as being a theory, as being considered a fact now, is because somebody sat down one day and literally just came up with this idea to solve these problems that we were seeing in the universe. That was it. That's really what black holes are. We've never actually seen them. Evolutionary theory is very similar to that. Yes, Darwin wanted to understand why species were changing and why they had similarities as well. He came up with this theory. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I don't follow every aspect of it. Like, I don't believe that, our cousins were apes or anything, but most of evolutionary theory is quite sound. It is quite sound. In terms of what we consider to be what? Excuse me. I'm trying to look at micro adaptations, things like this, mutations. In fact, without evolutionary theory, we would not understand viruses today or bacteria. We need it for a lot of things. Now, does that mean everything about evolutionary theory is correct? No. It doesn't even have to be. This is another reason that atheists often make these mistakes. They keep going around saying, oh, this is a pure 100% truth fact. It's like, what are you talking about? Have you not read the history of science? You have no idea what's happening, do you? Right now, you have a paradigm. That shift will occur. It's going to occur. It always occurs. It's just a matter of time. We don't have enough information yet to confirm whether it's the most correct view of things yet. We still have a long way to go. In fact, evolution as we know it today could be completely changed in the next 100 years. We have no idea. Okay. So science isn't really a search for truth. What do you mean by truth? I'm not a relativist, by the way. But what do you mean by truth? I mean, think about it. Do you have absolute knowledge of the world? No, you do not. Is truth, does that correspond with something directly? Or is truth in reality the most coherent understanding of something? Answer that question. Do you follow Islam because you have direct observable knowledge of God, of Allah, of the angels? No. Did Abu Bakr, did he, when he was asked about the Prophet ﷺ, when he went to the night journey, when he was asked, do you believe this? What was his response? I believe something even more incredible than that. I believe that Allah is sending revelation to him. So Abu Bakr didn't believe it because, oh, I saw it happen. He believed it because it was the most coherent thing for him to believe. Why not? Of course I do. I believe this. Right. So theories can be constructed without observation. Yes, they can. But in a different way. Yes, it's true that observation and experiment are central to science, but on a periphery level. Meaning that direct observations aren't always necessary to understand things. Our minds act as an interpretation machine, like a tafsir. We have to be able to coherently see, like if you look at something, okay, if you look at something you've never seen before, you don't have an interpretation of that, right? Because you don't know what it is. Just because you're looking at it, the thing itself doesn't inform you of what it is. You have to actually think about it, right? If somebody who's lived in a desert for their whole life and never seen an ocean, they can understand it to some degree. It's water, but they're like, whoa, what is this? That's not really a good example. I'm trying to think, or a mirage. A mirage is probably a better example. If first time you've ever seen a mirage, you've never heard of one, do you have any good reason to believe it's not water? Right? I mean, your interpretation is wrong, but you don't have any other means to understand it because you've never seen it before. You don't know how it's created. You don't know how it's formed. Are there holes in evolution theory? You guys really like evolution. Okay, sorry guys, give me 1 second. I'm talking a lot. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have a problem with evolution that much. And I'm not a liberal by any means. I'm Athari by creed. And I have a very conservative approach. But I can say that the majority of evolutionary theory does not conflict with Islam at all. There are holes, just like in any other theory. There's still there's still questions that need to be answered and problems that need to be addressed. How do you deconstruct arguments for logical positives? I'm going to answer all these questions, by the way. How do you deconstruct arguments for logical positivism? Well, people aren't really logical positivists today. They're mostly scientists. They follow scientism. And the first thing you have to do is you challenge it in the same way you challenge logical positivism. Okay, if science is the only means to know anything, well, how is that statement or that explanation you're making, how is that scientific? What scientific evidence do you have of that? And usually atheists will say, well, they will usually bring some other proof outside of that own verification in order to prove it. They'll say, well, science works. So they might use some pragmatic concerns. Well, it's like, well, okay, but that's not answering the question. Because you just said that science is the only way to know anything. And just because it works doesn't necessitate that you've proven that statement correct. You see what I'm saying? What is the Islamic comprehension of haqq? Haqq is, okay, truth. And I think Ibn Taymiyyah took a very similar position in this sense. It was more about coherence than it is about correspondence. Correspondence requires you to have direct observable knowledge of the subject. And the only people who ever think that way are what I would say are certain classes of Sufis who think they can have that sort of knowledge. I'm not going to comment on whether or not that's true or not, but from my understanding, it is impossible. Please verify with your own scholars, but it's impossible for that sort of knowledge to be had about God or anything else. Direct observable knowledge in that respect. It just doesn't work. You cannot perceive God. You cannot see God's attributes. You cannot experience God's attributes like that, 100%. Okay, it's just not going to happen. So when you say you're on the haqq, what do you mean? It's obviously you don't mean that you understand God 100%, right? Because that's impossible. So it must mean that you have the most coherent understanding of God. That's the only logical conclusion you can reach. Can you please give some references that document using evolution to justify oppression based on skin color and certain cultures? Yes, Muhammad Zia, Assalamu alaikum. There's not direct, I think there are some treatises that were written during the 18th and 19th centuries that, in this respect, especially in French, which have been translated, because French positivism was probably the main factor behind colonialism. French positivism. You look it up, you'll find every atrocity in the name of colonialism in Europe was justified through this means. And by the way, I know this is probably going to make you all very angry, but French positivism was also adopted by the reformed Ottoman Empire, which is why you got the Young Turks. That's right. All the reforms, the Tanzimat reforms, were based on French positivism, French society. So now you know kind of why we collapsed. That's just a clue. Next. Anonymous is correspondence theory essentially empirical then? It is direct observation and direct empiricism. It is what we call dogmatic empiricism. Empiricism in and of itself is not a problem as long as it's constructed along a more holistic understanding of reality. Because, for instance, Quine was an empiricist, but he considered himself a holistic empiricist, where he believed that you had to be coherent too. You couldn't actually like see the thing, you know what I mean, and then just interpret it as it is. Imam Ghazali would have considered an empiricist to some degree as well. Okay, so anonymous attendee, I'm sorry guys, I have shortness of breath, so I apologize that I'm not talking very well. Can we import scientific theories to the Muslim world uncritically and teach them in our schools? Or should there be a review to ascertain their compliance with the Islamic worldview? Now, see, this is where I can answer this question now because we've gone through all of this. There is a current movement in the Muslim world called the Islamization of knowledge, which was started in Turkey and Malaysia, specifically by a man by the name of Muhammad Naqib al-Attas, Malaysian philosopher, Islamic philosopher, one of the only remaining today. Also somebody that Hamza Yusuf respects. And I also learned under him very briefly and his students when I was in Malaysia. He's the main proponent of this theory. There are others as well, like Ismail Faruqi and others. And then you have another school of thought called by Ziauddin Sardar, who's more liberal, but I think he has a more correct understanding. Here's the thing. You can import scientific theories into your classroom. However, it has to address Islamic issues. You don't have to redefine the theory itself under an Islamic worldview. I don't agree with this perspective because you can't. I mean, the thing is, our values are what determine how science operates. That's something I didn't get into much discussion with because we don't have much time. But the reason, for instance, that the Muslims were so successful early in our history with science is because we had a need. We had a need to be, right? We were just a new empire. We had nothing. We had no resources. We had nothing. We needed what? We needed weapons. We needed gold. We needed to be able to mint gold. You know, we needed to be able to build buildings. We needed to be able to do a lot of things. So because of this need, this desire, we took the theories of the Greeks and we modified them and constructed new theories to develop, even as astronomical theories, to assist our society. Nowadays, the problem with the Muslim world is that we borrow everything from the West. Everything. We don't build anything ourselves. We have needs, but instead of providing for ourselves by taking those theories and modifying and doing our own thing to make our own stuff, what we have done is instead we've borrowed from everyone else. That's why the Arab world is so low today, and I'm sorry to say, in terms of technology and, and things like this, ingenuity, it's because they take everything from the West. Everything. And right now, the most advanced Islamic country, I mean, if you want to call it that, it's up to you. I'm not going to get into doctrinal disputes here, but the most advanced Islamic country or Muslim majority society is Iran. Now, why? Why is that the case? They are more advanced than any other Muslim country in the world in terms of medicine and even weaponry. Why? I'll tell you why. Because they can't borrow that much. They have been surrounded and sanctioned so much that they've had to rely on themselves. And because of that need, that's why they're developing their own stuff. But in the rest of the Muslim world, we're so used to borrowing from the West now because we've been colonized. Iran, by the way, was not, which is another historical fact. They broke away from that much earlier than the rest of the Muslim world. So once we decide to work for ourselves and for our own needs instead of borrowing from the West and expecting the West to provide for us, that is when the theories that we currently have will be modified in accordance with Islamic values, and that we will start advancing again. Because I'll tell you this right now, the reason the Golden Age existed was not because we borrowed from the Greeks necessarily, or we just advanced from them. No, we took what they had and we changed it completely because we needed it for something else. We needed it for our own values, our own beliefs. And because of those changes, we destroyed all the nonsense that came with Aristotelian philosophy. For instance, I don't know if you realize this, but Aristotle was also big into astrology. Okay, and that was also kind of and as Muslims became more, aware of their faith and more conservative, they got rid of that belief. And as Muslims became more liberal, they started adopting Aristotle again later on and astrology, and that's when we started to sort of become static. Now that's a whole different subject. Hopefully we'll get into a different module, but I thought that'd be interesting for you. Okay. Is Islam falsifiable? I don't believe Islam is falsifiable because I don't believe in falsifiability. See, Karl Popper came up with falsifiability. He believed that any sort of error that was found in a theory, in and of itself, just there, if you found one anomaly, that means the entire theory needs to be scrapped. So according to his own logic, and Thomas Kuhn debated him, and he said, well, according to your logic, then evolution must be scrapped because it can't be falsified. We don't have any, and there are anomalies too. So what are we going to do? So that's why Karl Popper had to eventually discard the theory. Falsifiability is nonsense. Nobody operates that way. Maybe at the micro level of science, but not overall. Theories do not operate by falsifiability. If they did, we wouldn't have any theories because we'd all be discarded. The moment you see a problem, they would discard them. And nobody actually works that way. Are there any Islamic reference materials against Sam Harris writing podcasts? No. But if I ever debate him, that'll hopefully be it. I've wanted to debate him for so long, actually. Actually, you know what? I'm actually thinking about writing something against one of his recent works with Majid Nawaz. I'll let you know. So, sorry, Tariq Roshan. Thank you for the question. Next. Most atheists use science as criteria for truth nowadays, so can this argument be used as argument against a criteria? You give me an argument, let me see what it says. P1, anything based on limited knowledge cannot be criteria for truth. P2, science is based on limited knowledge, therefore science cannot be a criteria for truth. No. Sorry, it's a bad argument. No offense. The reason it's a bad argument is because truth cannot be measured by limitations. What do you mean by truth then? Because you don't have knowledge of everything. So by the logic of their own argument, that means that Islam can't be true. Stuff of the law, right? So we should be very careful in that respect. Can you debate Neil deGrasse? Yes. You probably think I'm arrogant, but I'm not. I've studied these guys, like I know them like the back of my hand. You can actually, if you read my article on Yaqeen Institute, you'll see I've actually written against a lot of these ideas of Orientalists regarding Islamic history and science, and I mentioned Neil deGrasse Tyson in there. What does falsifiability even mean? I think I already asked that, didn't I? Did I answered that? It just means that something is proven to be incorrect if it results in an anomaly, or it results in a problem. So for instance, if you make a prediction and that prediction doesn't come true, therefore it's falsified. It doesn't ever question whether or not the question itself or the prediction itself was false. You see what I'm saying? Could you crush Neil deGrasse? Did I already answer that? Yeah. Crush. I don't know physically at this point because I'm quite weak, and he's probably a little bigger than I am. Mentally, in a philosophical discussion, yeah, probably. He's just a scientist. No offense to scientists. I mean, they're very valuable people, but in a philosophical discussion, they're really bad. Next, okay, you said most parts of evolution are okay. Muhammad Zia, assalamu alaikum. So is the only part that is wrong is that Adam alayhi salam said descended with some common ancestry. I think common ancestry is one of the biggest issues in general, not just because of Adam, but just because the theory itself is very unstable. That part of the theory is very unstable. In fact, that part of the theory is not even central to the theory itself. So you don't even need to believe that to believe in evolution. The only reason that scientists like to push it so much is because they want to undermine religion. Whatever. There are many Christian evolutionists, by the way. The whole Catholic Church is made of evolutionists. If they can do it, we don't have a problem.